Welcome to MBA Pod TV. I'm your host, Delaney Fernando. Today, we're bringing you special coverage of Kaplan Test Prep and Admissions presentation of the do's and don'ts behind business school admissions, held at Road to Business School in New York City. The Road to Business School is the premier forum to meet and greet with admissions officers and get an edge in your application. In 2010, The Road brought over 20 top business schools to 7 cities for open networking sessions, admissions panels, and GMAT breakout sessions. Ben Barron is hosting the session and is a former Harvard Business School admissions officer. He'll offer unique insight into the MBA application.
Okay, so we're going to talk about do's and don'ts. I'm going to share some stories with you because I find that that's helpful from my years on the admissions board at HBS and the thousands, if not tens of thousands of applications I've read over the years. So we're going to jump in. Some of the first slides are things that you're already likely familiar with. The return on investment of an MBA, some of you have done this research already and reached the conclusion that the MBA is the step that you want to take. And everyone has their own path to an MBA. I mean, for some of you, it's strictly an economic analysis, and you look at the payback, and it looks like it's a good investment. Others of you see it as a step to achieve your career goals. It's not necessarily a pure financial analysis. It's more, will getting an MBA allow me to do the things I hope to do in my life and in my career? However you look at it, and certainly from my own, I've taken a fairly non-traditional path in my career, both before business school and afterward. But I certainly can say it's one of the best, most fruitful decisions that I made was to pursue the degree, and not a day goes by that I'm not glad that I did. So as you start the admissions process, obviously you need to know who you're competing with, because that's going to set things up for you. So if we take a look at some of the key objective criteria, obviously you've got your GMAT. Some of you may have attended Dennis's session a little bit earlier to get some insight into the exam. Certainly all of us here hope you choose Kaplan to prepare for the exam. What's really critical is that you take the exam seriously, that you prepare for it. Even those of you who see yourself as good test takers on your own, the stakes of the exam are high enough that you need to do everything you can to get the highest score that you possibly can. But let's take a look at what the overall profile here is. So if we take a look at GMAT score, about a 550 is the 50th percentile. That is most likely not going to make you competitive at the top tier programs. Most of the top schools, on average, have scores at or in excess of 700. That doesn't mean you need a 700 to get in, but it does mean if your score is well below the average, then you need to have compensating strengths in other areas of your application. I've talked to a couple folks today who are kind of looking to go right to business school from college, and that is an unusual path, particularly at the top programs. It's not impossible. You see roughly 1 in 7 students has less than a year of full-time experience, but the sweet spot really is in that 3 to 5 year range. I expect that's where many or most of you that are here today fit in that group. So most are applying to business school with substantive experience, and that's important for you both as an applicant, but then also as a job candidate after you get your degree. The things you've done before you go to school are things that will make you attractive to prospective employers when you graduate. And then, oops, we didn't want to jump ahead there. And then finally on GPA, what's the average GPA at a top tier business school these days? Just shout it out. 3.5, maybe 3.6 at some programs. Actually a little bit lower than similar other types of graduate programs. Law schools, the average GPA is going to be higher because if you're applying to law school, most of the admissions piece, the admissions puzzle kind of lies with your LSAT score and your GPA, a little bit on your personal statement. Business school is a much more holistic application. Your work experience, the quality of your essays is going to count much, much more than it will for other disciplines. So you don't have to have been a 4.0 student to be competitive, but certainly the better you did the more competitive you'll be as an applicant. And those of you who are, quick show of hands, how many of you have graduate degrees? So as you kind of look around, you realize it's a net positive, but it doesn't make you completely unique. A lot of your colleagues, or those you're competing with for spots in the class, also have done graduate work. You never get away from your undergraduate GPA, even if you've done graduate work, because that's something that everyone's got. It creates something that's measurable, plus most graduate GPAs are pretty darn high. So even though some of you may be out of school for 10 years, and maybe you didn't study quite as hard as you could have as an undergraduate, unfortunately that always remains part of your record. So for those of you who are still in school, it makes sense to do what you can to keep your grades up, even as you're involved in other activities. Let me ask the group a question. If you were an admissions officer, if that was your job, to assess applications, and you could only look at one thing, you could only look at someone's grades or their GMAT score, but not both. Let me see, by a show of hands, I want full participation here, how many of you would look at grades? How many of you figure grades are probably the single best thing to look at? Let me see some, we're not leaving till everybody votes, so we're all very patient. Okay, so I'm seeing some hands, but it looks like a minority, just to make sure. How many of you would say the GMAT is a better predictor? Wow, that is a strong vote. Here's what normally happens when I ask this question. Those of you who have good grades say, oh, you should look at my grades. And those of you who may not be great test takers, or excuse me, those of you who may not have studied as much as you could have, and your grades are not reflective of your abilities, but you are a good test taker, you say, no, forget grades, that's just silly. That's, so what if it was 4 years of my life? My real evidence of my abilities and my GMAT score. Now, the reality is they're about equally predictive. I mean, they're both, in a sense, designed to predict academic performance at the next level. The GMAT specifically is designed to do that. The grades are a little bit broader than that. And that's why you have both parts of the application. Your job as an applicant, most of you are out of school. You can't do anything about your grades at this point, although you can do additional coursework. Most of you who have not yet taken your GMATs have a lot of work you can do to maximize your score. And I encourage, regardless of how you shake out academically or what your grades were, I encourage you to do all you can to maximize your GMAT score. That will make a big difference for you as an applicant. It is very important that you be able to articulate very clearly why you want to do this. It costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of your time. You're likely to give up a job. So why do you want to do it? Now, a lot of people, if they're being completely honest, when asked why they want to go to business school, will say something like this. Well, I don't really know what I want to do. I know I want to do something else. I know I want to make more money. I know I want to be better prepared for whatever the future holds for me. And that's why I want to go to school. I've got 2 years to figure it out. I've got a summer internship. I'll meet lots of interesting people with cool careers. I'll talk to companies. When I graduate, ask me then. I'll have it figured out by then. That is truthful for a lot of you, but it is not good enough in today's world to make you competitive, and if you are seeking top-tier programs. You need to have thought through, because those you're competing with have thought through why they want to do this, why they want to make a six-figure investment in an MBA. So you need to do this. And I imagine some of you here have done it, some are in the process of doing it, and some of you will be doing it. So you need to be able to make a case to me as an admissions officer, or the folks who are downstairs now, as to why you want an MBA, why you want to go to a particular school, why that program is right for you, and why now is the right time for you to do it. You'll need to be able to articulate it in your application, where you may have 4 essays or 5 or 6. And you'll have a couple thousand words probably to be able to spell it out. But the process starts with being able to make a tight elevator pitch of why you want to do this. And I encourage you, those of you who have not already done it, I encourage you to start thinking about, if you had 30 seconds, if your entire application process was an elevator ride with an admissions officer, could you make a strong case for yourself as to why you wanted the degree, why you wanted to go to their school, why you wanted to do it now. It's not good enough just to be qualified, to have a high enough GMAT score, to have good enough grades, to have the requisite experience, because look around you. This is one room in one city in the country of very smart, talented people, and I don't want to get you all competing against each other, but you are competing with each other in lots of cases. Many of you will be applying to the same programs, and there will be far more qualified applicants than there are spots at the top tier programs. You know, at Harvard Business School, you know, every year there'll be 8,000 or so applicants for the 900 spots in the class, and of those 8,000 applicants, 6,000 are pretty darn good. There might be a couple thousand that are objectively weaker and can be weeded out fairly quickly in the process, but there are still several thousand who are competitive. And if I just pick people at random, you might not be able to tell the difference if you showed up at class. That's how good a pool of people apply to the top tier programs can be. So just having qualifications is not going to be enough. In fact, that's a mistake some very highly qualified applicants will make. They'll think just by virtue of their good grades and high GMAT score and good experience, they can just take it easy on the essays and the interview and the rest of the process, and they don't necessarily make it. The application process is far too challenging to just coast through it. So now we want to start thinking about how you're going to present yourself when it starts, when you're starting to putting pen to paper and submitting your application. Some of the applications is going to be objective. So your GMAT score, your grades, your experience, what you do. Certainly as you start to talk about your experience, it's objective. You have a salary, you have a job title, but how you present it can be subjective. And as we as admissions officers, as we evaluate you, we're not just looking at your job title. We're not just looking at how much you earn. We're also looking at what your specific responsibilities are and what your successes are in whatever role you have. Now, how many of you here, just again, show of hands, how many of you would say you have a fairly traditional work experience? Your job's pretty traditional. Oh, surely more than 5 people have traditional work experience here. So how many of you would say you have non-traditional? You really have an unusual experience. And evidently about 50% of you do not have jobs based on, which I don't think is right, but you have chosen not to participate in my informal poll. But that's okay. Which do you suppose is better, traditional experience or non-traditional experience? It's a terrible question, and I'm sorry I asked, because neither is better, but they are different, and they do present different challenges for you as an applicant, and you need to understand there's no one-size-fits-all when you're applying to business school. So let's talk about the pros and cons of both. If you are a traditional applicant, well, the good news is we know the company you're working for, likely. We know the industry. You probably have pretty good credentials to have gotten this traditional job, whether it's in banking or consulting or marketing or engineering or other types of finance jobs. There's a whole range of jobs which could be considered traditional. It's probably a good company, it's probably a good job, probably have a lot of responsibility, can show a good track record. All of that is terrific. What's the downside? If there is a downside, what's the downside to having traditional experience when applying to business school? Yeah, it's a little bit harder to stand out, to distinguish yourself, because you've got a lot of people who, on the surface anyway, look a lot like you. They're doing similar jobs with similarly impressive credentials. So your challenge as a traditional applicant is, how do you stand out? How do you distinguish yourself? For those of you who have non-traditional experience, the good news is you stand out. And admissions officers, right away, we love you. We want to love you, and we will love you at the start because you do something unusual. Because when we're filling our class, and we know that each class, first-year class, we're going to have 60, 70 students in a class, maybe even more, discussing a marketing case or a finance case. We want diversity in the classroom. We want diversity of experience, diversity of opinion, diversity of background,